Friend, Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Life is filled with a lot of judgments. In our work, we are often reviewed. Our pluses and minuses are added up. This accounting determines whether we will receive a raise or a promotion or a termination. If we need professional help, we determine whether the lawyer, the doctor, the dentist, the accountant know what they're doing. And if we are on a jury, we must determine whether the accused and the witness are telling the truth. And of course, in the political realm, we must judge the competence and honesty of the candidates. Now, we Jews do the same thing in Torah study. We are confronted with all these complex figures, with these complicated biographies and experiences, and we try to determine what in the end we think about this character that's part of Jewish memory. And one of the most difficult people to evaluate is Joseph. What are we to make of this son of Jacob and Rachel? As a young man, he is arrogant. He thinks he's better than his brothers. We know he has this fancy multicolored coat that he's given. He spies on his brothers. He even dreams that his brothers and fathers will bow down to him. His brothers take revenge because they can't deal with his egotism. And yet when he's sold into slavery and ends up as the head of the house of Potiphar, this distinguished Egyptian nobleman, he acts with competence and loyalty and humility, and he even pushes away the sexual advances of Potiphar's wife. He comes from this patriarchal family. His great-grandfather is Abraham, and yet he assimilates into Egyptian society, taking on an Egyptian persona, dressing like an Egyptian, speaking the Egyptian language, taking on an Egyptian name, marrying the wife of an Egyptian priest. His ethnic identity is confused and hard to evaluate. How good of a Hebrew is he? He is the second most powerful man in Egypt and all the recesses in the world, but he makes no attempt to communicate with his father Jacob, who thinks he's dead. That seems cruel. He encounters his brothers who come to Egypt looking for food. Then he takes revenge on the brothers who sold him into slavery by calling them spies and holding their brother Shimon in prison. He plays with their minds to see if they feel remorse about selling him into slavery decades before. But in the end, he's forgiving and gracious and generous, makes sure they're well taken care of. And he even states that God has guided his complicated life all along, so they shouldn't feel guilty because all of them are just acting out a play that God has created. He skillfully manages Egyptian agriculture during the 7 years of plenty so that no one starves to death during the 7 years of famine. But then he turns around and uses the national emergency as an excuse to acquire all the Egyptian money, livestock, and land for Pharaoh. And ultimately, the population they become serfs. Was Joseph good or bad? My response is that this isn't a good question. People are complex. People do good things and they do bad things. People have moments of altruism and moments of selfishness. People do things resulting from wounds and traumas that they're not even aware of. We all have prejudice and misperceptions. We all act out of fear or hurt or revenge. We are all just human. Now, the Jewish virtue of judging others favorably is known. The Hebrew word is dan l'chaf, giving people the benefit of the doubt. In the Ethics of the Fathers, it says, we judge all men favorably. Now, Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, this is a hard name, Shmulevitz, who's from the Mir Yeshiva, it's a Lithuanian yeshiva that ends up being reconstructed in Jerusalem. Rav Chaim taught that in every human activity, there is good and there is bad. Even when we do the right thing, there's usually some aspect that is done for personal gain. No action is 100% pure altruism. Conversely, when we do something wrong, there is inevitably some good to those actions as well. The question is, where do we put the focus, on the positive or the negative? Do we choose to see people in the good that they do or the bad that they do? Do we focus on the positive aspects of their character or the negative aspects of their character? All good questions. Now, what does it have to do with what we're dealing with in our lives? Now, President Jimmy Carter passed away this week. And what have the pundits and columnists been doing this past week? I've read most of the articles, dissecting his life, his personhood, his integrity, his competence, making all kinds of statements about him, lauding him for his work for human rights, but criticizing his exercise of power, his handling of the economy, his stubbornness, his lack of understanding of the complexities of Washington, his handling of the Iranian hostage crisis, and the Baghuz rescue attempt. We Jews have been doing this as well. Some say he was a friend of the Jewish people, and some say that he was a rabid anti-Semite. I wish that life was so simple. Let's start from the very end. After he stepped down from the presidency, he became one of Israel's most outspoken critics and one of the Palestinians' most vocal supporters. When he published his book, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, in 2006, suggesting that Israel was on a path to becoming an apartheid state, he was roundly condemned by the American Jewish community. 14 members of his advisory board to his foundation resigned in protest. Abe Foxman, former director of the Anti-Defamation League, called him a bigot, while Deborah Lipstadt, now the Biden administration's special envoy in anti-Semitism, accused him of having a Jewish problem. Carter, a devoted evangelical Christian, strongly denied any anti-Semitism, saying criticism of his book had not weakened his commitment to a two-state solution for Israel-Palestine in the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Now, I think his language was intentionally provocative and poorly chosen. Apartheid is a word that leads to the delegitimation and the demonizing of Israel. But let's face the facts. His words of 2006 are seen as less provocative today. Many of us are deeply concerned about the state of Israel. The ongoing occupation of the West Bank and the plight of the Palestinians are beyond troubling. Many Israelis share this view. The Netanyahu government has racist ministers who support the oppression of Palestinians. A callousness has emerged in Israel's society that is troubling. It's all very complicated. And it can be said that Carter was unfair to the Jews, or held Israel to too high of a standard, or expected perfection from the Jewish people. That's unfair. But hold on. Jewish appraisals of Carter often leave out that he was the force behind September 1979 Camp David Accords. Bringing Sadat and Begin to Camp David was a bold and redemptive. That handshake was one of the great moments in the 20th century. Do we forget that? That peace has held for 46 years. That cold peace with Egypt gave Israel breathing room to flourish and become the economic and high-tech miracle it is. In 1994, the Jordan Peace Treaty and the Abraham Accords were built on its foundation. Israel exists in no short measure because of his tenacity. Nor should we forget that the founding of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum was the Carter administration's initiative, one that helped transform the lives of survivors and their descendants. He negotiated the Israel Anti-Arab Boycott Act of 1977, which prohibited American companies from cooperating with Arab boycott by refusing to do business with Israel. Carter lit the first Hanukkah menorah in Lafayette Park on December 17th, 1979, an experience which began the tradition of lighting the Chanukiah in Washington and many capitals around the world. So what are we to make of Carter? Now, I'm not sure, but I don't like labeling him. It trivializes him. The good versus bad dichotomy just doesn't seem to work. It's superficial and it's unfair. People are more complicated and complex than that, especially people who actually try to do anything in life. Now, judgment is easy, but is it useful or even truthful? People are multidimensioned. We are unpredictable. We show self-control at times, but are impulsive at other times. We are victims of our own histories and misperceptions. We are casualties of the law of unintended consequences. Our good intentions can be misunderstood. Perhaps the best thing to say about anyone is that they did their best based on the hand that they were dealt. Don't all of us want to be judged fairly? Don't all of us want to be given the benefit of the doubt? Do any of us want to be judged only by our less than stellar moments or moments of inarticulate rhetoric? Why do we need to pigeonhole people into like these neat silos of judgment? Is that person good or is that person bad? Perhaps we need to purge that question from our speech. In the end, we are all mysterious creatures, even to ourselves. The appropriate question to be asked, I think, is, did they do their best? Did they try to live their lives with integrity and decency? Did they contribute to the world in some positive way? In the end, let us judge each other kindly. Carter deserves this, and so do we. Shabbat shalom. Okay. It's interesting. This is a footnote. I remember so vividly I don't know about you, when Begin and Sadat and Carter were at the White House. Okay? I just remember it so vividly. And here is just the thing that really was remarkable to me. When Menachem Begin had a chance, and I've totally changed my view of Menachem Begin. I used to think he was an extremist, but he was really an incredible man. So, an extremist in some ways, but a really incredible man. I didn't properly honor him in history. But if you remember the Camp Day when he was at the White House, what does Menachem Begin do? Do you remember? He takes a kippah, he puts it on his head, and he chants, Shir HaMa'alot, which is about the Jewish people returning to the land of Israel. I mean, it was one of the most riveting moments in I think, in American history, with Menachem Begin, this Holocaust survivor, brilliant man, putting on a kippah, and in front of the world, chanting. It's the paragraph that we say before the Birkat Hamazon, before the grace after meals. It was remarkable. It's good to remember history. I know we only remember what happened yesterday, but it's good to have a broader sense of what history is about, what happens in these moments. And I don't want to repeat myself. So